Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Matt Hotha, the Director of Production and Online Engagement, and I'm here with Justin LaRosa. He's the minister of our downtown location called the Portico. We don't have time to tell you about all that, though, because today we're going to be talking about Howard Thurman, and Justin just finished preaching a sermon about Howard Thurman, a mystic. Tell us a little bit about Howard Thurman.
Yeah, he was born in Florida. He is a mystic and really laid the foundation for so much of the work that was done in the 60s, the civil rights movement. He was kind of a groundbreaker in so many different ways. He was the first black man to visit Gandhi. He was the first dean of a mostly white university, Boston U. And he was a mystic and really creating connection with people in struggle to God, that when it didn't feel like God was with them because their surroundings. We're going to get into that.
Yeah. So you said that he laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement. So let's kind of jump, without being rude to Dr. Thurman, jump sort of to his legacy in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that MLK was influenced by Thurman's work. Right. How did that kind of lay the groundwork for some of the work that MLK did?
Well, I think that his writing in Jesus and the Disinherited, which was his most famous and probably most influential book, he had lots of them, was he connected Jesus as this poor Palestinian with no rights, right? With no rights at all, second class, different from Paul. And he showed that God cared about the people on the edges so much. And if you look at Jesus's life and work and ministry, it's mostly those people on the edges, those people excluded, that he was saying, no, it isn't all about this. It's about relationship with God, and you have access for it, and God chooses you. And that would have been groundbreaking, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for a segregated society where blacks were second-class citizens.
Yeah.
So his work and his thought and his writing and his just leadership, I think, laid the groundwork for MLK to kind of take it. And also, obviously, the nonviolence that he learned from Gandhi.
Yeah, and so all that kind of came together and kind of catalyzed in the civil rights movement, right. Which then we kind of... So when we think about then the blend of contemplation, nonviolence, but then action, right? The work of MLK changed the world. I mean, sure. Changed America for sure. Granted, America still has a lot more work to do. Mm-hmm. You talked about that towards the end of your sermon. But for someone who's looking to enact change or maybe make change, what's that connection, and why is it so important to have contemplation and action wedded together?
So this isn't original to me in any way, shape, or form. On the reason that nonviolent action worked in the 60s was it makes evil reveal itself. So, for example, when we still know in the 60s, the black and white videos and pictures of the dogs and the hoses, right? Had there been violent response to that, we wouldn't have those things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this anger, and what Thurman talks about is that we must connect with God within to know who we are in God, right? And rely on that inner strength to let us be fearless. And so how do you do that so you don't get poisoned with hate? And that's where I think contemplation happens. Richard Rohr, the well-known Franciscan, talks about his experience with activism. Sometimes activists end up attacking with the same energy as the oppressing force.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do we do that? We need to create silence. And that's what, silence has changed my life. You know that. We've talked about that a lot. I've always been fairly a person with a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of anger. For any Enneagram folks, I'm a 1, and I can operate out of anger, which is operating within the flesh. And I think I might be doing things good and right. But when I'm connected to the Spirit, I operate out of a wisdom and a peace where there's still anger about the way things are, but there's a peacefulness about going about it. And for me, that happens in my contemplative practice of 20 minutes every day and reflecting on scripture, right? And so that has reigned true for my life. And I think a lot of people like Richard Rohr and others would say that we must ground our action in silence so God can work on us, so that that hate and that anger and that fear doesn't poison us.
Yeah. And so at the end of your sermon, you mentioned a few things in our local community here in the Tampa Bay area that could probably make many of us angry.
Yes.
And in fact, I think when I was filming something a moment ago, I felt myself getting a little angry talking about it, right? Can you describe a couple of those things that the Justice Initiative is taking on, or the Justice team is taking on here at Hyde Park? And then maybe one bit of encouragement about how you're doing that in a non-anxious way, maybe you're a non-angry way.
Yeah, so I think that, again, the Justice team, when we say that word for Hyde Park, there's a Justice team at the Hyde Park campus and at the Portico campus. Both, they work together. I think the two huge things that absolutely break my heart, when you're thinking about justice issues for people on the edges who are held down in some way or broken or whatever, mental illness, whatever it is, where do you look at the world and your heart breaks? And then what is God prompting you to do, right? For me, affordable housing or the lack thereof and people experiencing homeless are the things for me. And was really exciting in 2019, was groundbreaking. The Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality, which is an organization that we partner with. It's it's many congregations, many backgrounds come together to have a voice for power for those who can't or won't speak. Got $10 million a year infused in the Hillsborough County budget, which is $9 billion a year, and for affordable housing. And then just this last year, last September, 4 commissioners gutted it. Almost gutted all of it. One saved $2 million, but the reality is they gutted it. And that was really, really frustrating, right? So creating, telling stories, engaging with the commissioners, some will, some won't, and encouraging our congregation who have voted or supported these people, and some of you have given money to them, to call them and say that we are in affordable housing crisis. Affordable housing crisis. So grounding that, like that fire that I get in my eyes when that happens, to inviting God in and saying my word, Abba, thy will be, which is like saying, God, you know what I need and what I need to do. Prepare me for it, is one thing. The second is the House Bill 1365, which goes into effect October 1st, which says that homeless folks are going to be in camps providing services, which sounds really good. And there's some parts of that it's an unfunded mandate first. But those who don't could be arrested for sleeping in public places, which is going to it's going to put a yoke on them, right? It's going to put in the criminal justice fines and fees and blah blah blah. So the Supreme Court just basically affirmed that a couple of weeks ago. So figuring out ways to engage with police to look for solutions together. This is a real problem. It ain't easy. We deal with it at the Portico all the time, but we need discernment, we need clarity, we need wisdom. And doing things out of anger and in anger, when that's the prevailing force, doesn't end up good. But connecting with Christ and each other to get that wisdom and clarity and practicing contemplation will help us engage not only the forces of power, but to be able to come from a place of peace as we push on those things for those who can't speak for themselves.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Normally I give you the final word, but I would like to take it today if you don't mind. Okay. So one thing that Justin talked about in his sermon is Howard Thurman's idea of not Howard Thurman's idea, but he was in the stream of thought of God's preferential option for the poor.
Yep.
And one place where Howard Thurman picked up that idea was from Psalm 139. So one thing I wanted to challenge you to do this week, wherever you might be, maybe not in your car, but when you get home from wherever you're driving, is to sit down with Psalm 139 and give it a read. Chances are you're going to read the first half of it and be like, oh, wow, God's with me. God's for me. God wants to be with me. There's
big pivot.
Yeah, there's going to be a big pivot. Wait for it. But there's an intimacy to it that kind of tells you that, well, if you're in a place of mightiness, it might make you feel really small, because it sort of might make you think that God controls everything or God ordains everything. And for many faith traditions, or for many people, that's a really comforting thought. But one thing that I would encourage you to do is read it from the perspective of someone who's poor or disenfranchised. And the idea that God's with you is actually something that might make you feel bigger, might make you feel like you've got an advocate on your side, right? Yeah. I think that's what that meant to Howard Thurman. And then you'll get to the part in verses 13 through 18 that are really familiar. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I give thanks because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, right? We know those lines. But then the psalm takes a pivot, as many psalms do, in verses 19 through 22. And I want to caution you here. I'm going to read this section, actually, and I want to caution you that don't get afraid of the anger here. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. So in verse 19, it starts, if only God, you would kill the wicked. If only murderers would get away from me. The people who talk about you, but only for wicked schemes. The people who are your enemies, who use your name as if it were of no significance. Don't I hate everyone who hates you? Don't I despise those who attack you? Yes, I hate them through and through. They've become my enemies too. Examine me, God, look at my heart. Put me to the test, know my anxious thoughts. Look to see if there's any idolatrous way in me, then lead me on the eternal path. So the psalm takes this pivot from, God, you're with me, you know me, to, I'm really also angry. Like there's people who hurt me, who don't trust in God, or who use God's name in a...
Or deceivers.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we see that like all throughout our culture.
Right.
It drives me insane.
Yeah. People who... Right. What I want to encourage you to do, though, is not get turned off by this part of the psalm. Maybe get a little discomforted by it. But check out what the psalmist is doing here. If anything, this is a healthy letting go.
For sure.
This ancient writer put this down. They didn't just keep this thought within themselves and let it stir and fester and grow. They got it out. So if there's any part of you in doing this work of contemplation, in dealing with the injustices in our life that have to write down some things about what you're really, really frustrated about, this Psalm 139 for us is permission to do that.
And what we talked about real quickly before off camera was that when I work with people who are struggling with anger in the 12-step community, even when I talk with people from the church who are like, they had like something bad happen to them, or they're really angry about something, I, in a similar way, without really knowing it, I say, name that. Talk about how much you are angry, how much you hate that person or group or whatever it is, and invite God in to your unwillingness. That is like the first step. Like, here it is. This is the truth of how I feel. And I don't want it to change. I would rather just feel that way and operate out of that, because that makes me, but God, enter into that. Enter into that. And that's what they examine my heart, right? And that's what happens in the inner room. Matthew 6, go into your inner room, close the door, pray to the Lord your God in secret, for the Lord your God knows what you're going to pray before you say it. That's the work.
Great. Well, thanks, Justin. Thank you for joining us. We will be back next week. See ya.
See ya.